As a result of the last few days, it seems kind of almost the case that the Tories have picked the fight with the wrong person, and that the BBC have sort of dug themselves into something of a very strange and ugly hole for backing down to the government and resulting in the loss of four of its quite high-profile presenters in Lineker, Wright, Shearer, Mohammed and Scott. So, ladies and gentlemen, I thought at this stage of the proceedings, I feel like what we should do like a pro and a con sort of list. And then we can use Occam's razor to determine whether or not what Lineker has done has been for the best. So, let's do this and let's see how well we can do it. Pro, Gary Lineker has exercised his free speech, and he is more than welcome to in a free democratic country. Con, because he exercised his free speech, it has resulted in him circa losing his job with the BBC because he exercised his freedom of speech. Some Tory MPs will indeed clap and say that just because you can does not mean you should. Pro, Gary Lineker is not backing down for what he is doing. He stands absolutely by his comments, and there are quite a lot of people who would have immediately folded over, especially if they're picking fights with the government over stuff like this. Con, some people might look this as saying that Gary Lineker is just unwilling to back down because some people will just think that he is still in the wrong, and when people see that people are so obviously in the wrong, the best thing those person could do is just apologize to try and make things better. Pro, by not backing down and not willing to stand for the BBC, or rather the BBC not willing to defend one of their high-profile presenters, they've established some sort of strange revolution, ladies and gentlemen, in which if you say your piece, then you should stick by it. And if you stick by it, then regardless of what happens, you'll be seen as a hero by the eyes of many for actually wanting to stand up and stay true for what you believe in, especially if it's criticism of any authoritarian, or rather of anything that you inherently disagree with. Con, because once again, you've shown solidarity and you've tried to show this stage of, like, say, a revolution, so to speak, it doesn't mean to say that in the end it will actually work. In the end, some people will say that the government's laws are simply what they choose to make them, and they could pass up, for example, a legislation where it is forbidden to strike at whatsoever, and millions of people can form their own little revolution, but would that actually change anything to the government's actions or causes remains to be seen. Pro, a lot of people are going to look towards Gary Lineker and say that what actually he's done is extremely admirable, brave and courageous. Con, some people will immediately have gone straight off Gary Lineker because they will clap and say, because of what he's done for picking fights with the government, it means, once again, it's resulted in the end of his job. And they say that trying to pick a fight with an authoritarian power is not brave and admirable. But in reality, it could have led to so much worse than simply just losing your job, let alone whether or not people stand with you or not. Pro, Gary Lineker, and there have been many other sports presenters and music presenters who are very anti-Tory and who've been voicing their opinions on Twitter and on social media for many years. And this is one of the very few cases, ladies and gentlemen, where actually, as impartial as the BBC say they are, they've taken a stand. And I fancy it will not take very long, ladies and gentlemen, before plenty of others from the BBC, maybe from Sky Sports, ITV, BT, Amazon, Netflix, they start taking stands for what they believe in, and they could start an entirely new culture in which you are free and brave to voice your opinions about the government without fearing of getting the sack. Con. This in reality, in the eyes of the government, they might say that in next week people will have stopped talking about it, and whatever solidarity Shearer or Wright or Scott or Mohammed might have had for Lineker, it could have dissolved, because there's no such thing as a middle class union, because in times of stress anybody would just be begging any one of the others to blackleg just to get somebody else's job. Pro. Lineker has made this government look foolish and extremely unhinged, because some people once again say that because he's a sports presenter, he's actually managed to make the government's bill on migration look so unbelievably frail that any sort of response is enough to draw the ire from politicians and those backing the politicians. Con. What actually has happened is that Lineker has kicked a hornet's nest, and all the hornets are doing are going to start swarming around anybody who starts criticizing the government. And this could lead to not so much a bill forbidding strikes, but soon a bill that forbids criticism of the government. Pro. This will probably not be the end you'll hear of this. Lineker will be able to say a lot more things right now, knowing that he does not have the weight or scrutiny of the BBC to hold him back. And any comparisons that Lineker does make right now will actually be more weighted and supported, because it has come to light that there are actually a lot more comparisons to this government compared to Hitler's government of the 1930s in Germany. Con. This is 2020's Britain and not 1930s Germany. We are not like the Nazis. Quite a lot of the government's actions are very, very reminiscent of things like the SS or the Gestapo, but they do not lack much of their competency, all of their organisation. But that's something that the Tories, even at the very last resort, they never will, by the way, they resort to challenging people intellectually that they are not Nazis. But in times when they will have no other choice but to do it, that's what they will fall back on, by simply saying that they're not Nazis, and to the eyes of some people, that's literally all the proof you need. Pro. Gary Lineker is brave, admirable, and courageous for standing up to bullies. Con. Gary Lineker is not brave and courageous, because no government body, whether it's Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, SNP, Green Party, etc., will ever consider themselves bullies. Whether they are right or wrong is anonymous. They will not consider themselves it. And if you can't consider somebody or convince somebody that they are what you call them, then how are they meant to believe it? Pro. Criticism is not harassment. And what Gary Lineker has done is not harass the government, it is criticize them. Con. The law of this government is that criticism is harassment, and the Tories will think an eye for an eye, so we will harass him to his employers, and that will be the end of it. Pro. Plenty of more people will come out and share their stories about talking about the criticism of this government. A lot of female journalists I know absolutely will say a lot about this, and they will look up to Gary Lineker as at least the sort of like political rebel that led them on this way, and they will open up quite a lot more opportunities for people to exercise their freedom of speech in this way. Con. There'll be a lot more noise but not many people saying anything. Also, in the eyes and the ears and the senses of all the British press, whether it's Daily Mail or Daily Mirror, there is not one subject that these papers do not enjoy more than dragging a woman's name through mud. They will do it because that's just sort of how it's been, ladies and gentlemen. And it won't take much more than looking as building Gary Lineker as a messiah or a god figure. Nothing like that is going to convince anyone else that Gary Lineker thinks that he's shooting above his own station, if some of the tabloids and some of the right-wing press have their say about it. In years to come, whatever government we're in, it will not take very long for people to look back and say that people who showcase the government for what they are through the cracks in the system, this is sort of what it's going to turn out to be. No matter who you work for or how much you earn a year, that should be unanimous. Con. The government has blocked the very first episode of 93-year-old David Attenborough's 5-part documentary series called Wild Isles, because the first episode talks so heavily about pollution. That means that the government are so fearful that the backlash it's going to receive. So the government will resort to any amount of censorship, any amount of press stoppage, any amount of authoritarian ideology or action, just to make sure people do not get exposed to this sort of information. They will do everything in their power, whether it's Gary Lineker or David Attenborough, possibly even you or me, to keep our mouths very firmly shut so that nobody can harass this government again. Because that is their agenda. As long as they can get away with it, that is all that matters to them. Verdict? We go with the pro, ladies and gentlemen. I would have even gone for the pro if even some of the cons were so damning in terms of more reality than, or rather, reality or fantasy. Because surely the optimistic point of view would suggest that even at its very worst, what Gary Lineker has done and his comrades, quite rightly, ladies and gentlemen, have opened up a very, very ugly can of worms. And by criticizing this government in this nature, showcases just exactly his point. Because, like I've said before, ladies and gentlemen, if somebody was to call me out for calling me a fascist, then what I would do, ladies and gentlemen, is challenge it intellectually to prove that I'm not. And I would love to see examples where people said I was a fascist because of A, B, and C. We would talk about it. I would discuss why I am not. I want to talk about the things that maybe he was confused by, and maybe if he got mixed messages. I want to get to know the person who said this, and I hope we can come to some sort of arrangement or conclusion from there. Because, ladies and gentlemen, remember this. Hate is a very, very strong word. And it's one that not even I use very often, because I want to consider that the whole world is my neighbour. Everybody is my neighbour. And if we're going to learn to get along on this planet at all, ladies and gentlemen, I suggest that we just get along with each other. Because we should be learning how to work together, not fight each other. Incidentally, there are some people out there who only want to fight. That is the only thing that's on their minds, and they want things to fail and fall apart. But unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, and unfortunately for this government, even Germany's worst Chancellor, Adolf Hitler, even he and his government fell apart eventually. They may feel that they are on top of the world, ladies and gentlemen, with this delusionment of power, but nobody stays on top forever, and I'm certain they know of it. Take care, ladies and gentlemen, and keep your minds very wide open.